Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another Tax Practitioner Board webinar. My name is Lun Lak, and I'm joining you from Gadigal country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I would like to pay my respect to them and their cultures and elders, past and present. To begin, I have a few quick housekeeping messages for you. So firstly, to obtain a copy of today's slides, you can visit our website at Webinar Resource Hub at tbb.gov.au/webinar-hub. We'll also email you a copy of the slides afterwards as well. So today's webinar counts towards your continuing professional education or CPE, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. In relations to claiming your CPE, we will also issue an attendance certificate to those staying on for the duration of the webinar. Today, we will look at the new Code of Professional Conduct Obligations. We'll discuss the reasons why there are new obligations, the government's transitional arrangements, our consultation process, the new requirements relating to keeping clients informed and keeping proper clients' records. And then we'll finish with a panel discussion and answer some of the questions that you may have. We also have Fiona and Madeline from our policy and legislation team to respond to your questions as we go. So please submit them using the Q&A. We have a lot of people online today, so we may not get to all of your questions. However, we will have FAQs available on our website following the webinar. Also, a reminder to keep your comments courteous and professional. When we start, we will be also turning off the chat, so to minimize any disruptions. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker and panelists for today, Peter DeCure, TBB Chair, Tariq Kumar, our Director of Policy and Legislation, and Nadia Harris, one of our Senior Policy Advisor. Welcome all. Peter, over to you to start us off.
Thanks, Lon, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for part 2 of our Code Determination webinar series. For those of you that were online last week when we did part 1, there'll be a little bit of similarity in terms of the introduction of today's topic, but we'll get into some of the newer detail in the main body of the presentation. So if you'll bear with me. Firstly, I think it's really important. The TPB acknowledges that there are a lot of questions in relation to the new Code of Professional Conduct Obligations, and there has been some legitimate concerns expressed through the professional bodies and through your own comments. So we're acutely aware of that, and we're trying very hard to make sure that we help you to implement whatever changes you need to make in a practical and reasonable way. I know that some of members of the profession feel that you're being punished for the group of a small group of people who have behaved poorly, but I want to hopefully today reassure you that that's not the case, and show you how some of these new requirements will pretty easily fit in with what you're already doing. And that comes really from the basis that the TPB does understand and acknowledge that the vast majority of you are doing the right thing and are, if not 100% compliant with everything, that you're really doing your best to be 100% compliant. The additional code items that we are talking about are really largely consistent with the existing code and the Taxation Services Act, or the TASA for short. But what we're going to talk about is a little bit more specificity to what is already expected of tax practitioners. And as I said, we understand that most of you are already meeting these requirements. The other thing I'd say is that these requirements largely mirror the professional standards that are endorsed by the Accounting Professional and Ethical Standards Board, or the APES standards. Now, those standards already are fully applicable to anybody who's a member of the larger of the 4 professional bodies, CPA Australia, CANS, and the Institute of Public Accountants in particular, who are all signatories to those standards. So what these changes do is really make those APS standards applying across the whole of our tax profession, and it helps us in terms of creating a level playing field. So let's jump into what's going on in terms of government reform. I want to go over a little bit of background, and as I said, apologise if some of you have heard this before. But importantly, the legislative instrument and the requirements contained in the additional obligations are built upon the existing principles of the Code. These include honesty and integrity, independence, confidentiality, and competence. Government's aim with these additional specific requirements is to assist in improving the integrity and accountability of the profession overall, and again, to ensure that there is genuinely a level playing field between participants. This really does mean, as I've said, the vast majority of you are already complying. If not, there is time for you to amend some practices and processes, and you can be assured we will implement these changes in a pragmatic and practical fashion, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So I'd like to move on and talk about the obligations, the purpose, and what they aim to achieve. From the outset in 2019, government accepted recommendation 5.1 from the independent James review of the TPB's operations. This recommendation was that the minister be given the power to supplement the code to address any emerging or existing behaviours and practices that needed to be regulated. On 6 August 2023, government also announced a significant package of reforms to crack down on misconduct and rebuild confidence in the tax system and keep our capital market system strong. These reforms were aimed to increase the powers of the TPB and other regulators and to strengthen the regulatory frameworks. This resulted in the government amending legislation on 1 January 2024, which introduced the additional obligation which requires practitioners to comply with any obligations under section 30.12 of the Code. This provision is the one that allows the minister to make a ministerial determination and to create new obligations. And this is really about allowing government, through the minister, to act quickly in the event of new or emerging issues. The minister must ensure that any additional obligations relate specifically to professional and ethical conduct and are consistent with the other parts of the Code, in particular the scheme of the Code. So we now know that the minister has issued a determination using this power and that he has introduced 8 new obligations pursuant to the Code of Conduct. So these obligations, flicking over to the next slide, these obligations include upholding and promoting the ethical standards of the tax profession, the requirements relating to false or misleading statements that we talked about last week, managing conflicts of interest when undertaking activities for government, and maintaining confidentiality in dealings with government. Talking about keeping proper records of tax agent services provided. We're going to talk about that in more detail today. Obligations relating to supervision, control, competency and quality management under the TASA. And again, we'll talk today about keeping your clients informed of certain matters. Importantly, these new obligations align very closely with the existing scheme of the Code in the 5 key principles. They leverage material from the work of other existing bodies, such as APES Ethical Standards Board, which has developed and released themselves substantial guidance. Other elements of the Code build on well-known and understood corporate and tax law concepts that practitioners are both familiar with and often regularly advising on. Moving on to the transitional approach. So we've got the new determination, and following significant representations from the profession, government decided to make it a transitional approach to the implementation. And this will mean that the implementation or effective date of the law will be different for large practices and small practices. We don't expect that the small practices will necessarily implement the same level of systems and procedures in terms of sophistication as the large firms will, but we do expect that all practitioners have appropriate arrangements in place to ensure that you're operating in a professional and ethical way. We recognise very much that smaller practices don't have the resources of the large ones, and that they have significantly less of the systems and paperwork, policies and procedures that might be suitable for larger firms. So what we want to do is help people setting up their own practices to meet the requirements in a way that's relevant to the size and type of client base and type of tax agent services that you're providing. On the 8th of October, government amended the original determination to clarify the intent and scope of the new obligations and specifically to refine how practitioners address integrity and transparency and to provide these transitional dates in terms of application. So the new code will apply with effect from the 1st of July for all tax practitioners with 100 or less employees as at 31 July 2024. This includes new practitioners with 100 or less employees who register between 1 August 24 and 30 June 2025 inclusive. The provisions apply effectively from 1 January 2025 for all other tax practitioners, i.e. those who have more than 100 employees. This delayed application for the smaller practices should allow more time to adequately implement any changes to systems and processes that you require. So let's just talk about the consultation process. To support the implementation of this, the TPB has engaged very much with the consultation process with the professional bodies up until last week. At the end of last week, and that consultation process was designed to get as much feedback as we could about the draft guidance that we had released in advance to the profession to try and make sure that that guidance was easily consumable, practical, and able to be useful to practitioners. As of last Thursday, we opened up the consultation to a public consultation, which means all of you can have a direct input into that process. So any feedback that you've got for us about the draft guidance would be gratefully received and should be emailed to us no later than 21 November at tpbsubmissions@tpb.gov.au. Once the public consultation period closes, we'll consider all the feedback that we receive and then we'll move to finalise and publish our guidance in time for the application date of the new law. As I've said, we're committed to supporting you through the process, and our draft information sheets will be strengthened by hopefully this webinar series over the next week or so, and we'll do more webinars early in the new year when the guidance documents have been finalised and released. We will also be updating our website information, including the frequently asked questions, on an ongoing basis to keep you informed of the latest information and interpretation. From a TPB perspective, we're well aware a number of new reforms have taken place in recent times, and therefore, as I've said, we'll work hard to make sure that our implementation is both practical from your perspective and pragmatic. Our immediate focus for the time being is to finalise the guidance and to educate practitioners so that everybody has a good understanding of what's required of them in their day-to-day practice. And we very much focused on trying to support the practitioners who are doing the right thing on a daily basis. This will include providing reasonable time for you to understand your obligations, to assess your practices, and to implement changes if required. So with that background in place, I'd like to move on and start talking about keeping proper client records. So let's take a high-level look at the requirements under Section 30 of the determination, and jump up. That's the slide. Good. Now, one of the things I want to emphasise is that these record-keeping requirements are very consistent with existing requirements for your clients to maintain records that adequately demonstrate the appropriateness of their tax returns and tax positions, etc. So these requirements for a practice are really consistent with those. And I want to emphasise that these new requirements do not require practitioners to become tax office auditors, which is one of the things that I think has been spread around by a few people. But what we want you to be able to do is to keep proper client records that correctly record the tax agent services that you provide or which are provided on your behalf to each of your clients, including former clients. To satisfy this, Records must be in the English language or easily converted into the English language. They must be retained for at least 5 years after the service has been provided. And as I said, this aligns very much with the standard time frame for record keeping prescribed under Australian tax law. These records must also include all relevant information considered in the provision of tax agent services and should include things like information you've exchanged with your client, advice provided to the client. For the more complex matters, it might include summary information of the relevant facts, the assumptions, the reasoning underpinning any advice to your client. So typical examples of that would be the file notes of what research you might have done on a particular issue, or perhaps, cases that you've read, tax rulings that you've relied on, those sort of records, so that if there's a contest about a position that's been taken, you'll be able to substantiate what you or your team have done to make sure that the services provided have been appropriately researched and based on good facts. Clearly, we're not asking you to keep downloads of a full client's ledger. Clearly, we understand that a lot of the work that is done these days by agents and tax agents and BAS agents is working on the live ledgers and live records of their clients. So what we're actually talking about is having enough substantiation to demonstrate that the work you've done has given proper consideration to the facts and circumstances of the case. By complying with this obligation, you'll be able to refer to your records as clear evidence of your actions and clarify the things that have been considered in making or recording the tax positions that have been taken. So let's move to the next slide and we'll deal with some clear items that should be part of your records. In a first instance, the simple things like the client's details, name, contact information, date of birth, bank and employment details, engagement letters, as I've said, file notes, specifically relating to what you've done in terms of proof of identity checks, including relevant authorising documents for representatives of clients. Importantly, the TPB does not recommend that you keep copies of identity documents. We recommend that you have a proper process to record that you've cited them and that you're comfortable that you've identified the client. You should have copies of client permissions, including any relevant consent to disclose their private information. You should have records that explain or evidence an essential part or element of a tax agent or BAS service provided to a client, or the steps taken to provide that advice. You should maintain the key client communication and records of discussions with the client, including any requests for further information and responses. That might mean copies of letters, copies of emails, copies of file notes that are made in the course of the provision of services. Key communications with third parties, for instance, including ATO and other government agencies that are relevant to the tax services. Tax invoices issued to clients evidencing the nature and scope of the work that's been provided for them, and records evidencing the receipt and handling of money or property that may be held in trust, and disbursement instructions and authorities in connection with the provision of those sort of services. Importantly, I say again, you're not required to retain duplicate accounting records or source documents belonging to your clients. That's your client's responsibility. The records you're required to retain and keep will need to reference information you reasonably considered in providing tax agent services. But this, again, doesn't amount to an obligation to retain duplicate copies or reproductions of client information. You can find more examples in our guidance, but you are likely, I would imagine most of you are already likely to be meeting these requirements in your day-to-day activities. You should also be discussing and recording your discussions with your clients in relation to their obligations to keep their own tax records. Let's move forward and discuss a quick case study. So Michael's a registered tax agent and sole director and supervising agent of ACE Accountants, which is a registered tax agent company. Lisa is an employee of ACE Accountants and undertakes services relating to the preparation of income tax returns and BAS's for clients on behalf of the company. Lisa is not a registered tax or BAS agent. Because he's the nominated supervising agent for the company, it's Michael who's responsible for the supervision and control of Lisa in undertaking the services and ensuring the services that she provides on behalf of the company are provided competently. Therefore, again, it's Michael who's responsible for ensuring that ACE Accountants keeps records that correctly reflect and record the tax agent services provided on behalf of the company, including any services provided by Lisa, to each of its clients and former clients. So just to re-emphasise the requirements again, the records must be in English or readily accessible and easily convertible to English. They must be retained for at least 5 years after the tax agent's service has been provided. They must show the nature and scope and outcome of the tax agent's service provided. They must reference information reasonably considered in the provision of the tax agent's service and include all information and advice received from the client and provided to the client. Specifically, for more complex advice cases, the relevant facts and assumptions and the reasoning underpinning any advice provided. In this case, examples of records that correctly record the tax agent services include, without being limited to, file notes and records of conversations with the client in relation to the client's instructions, the working papers that are generated by ACE accountants, including those generated by Lisa in relation to those tax agent services, and documents provided to the client, for example, completed ATO forms for review and signature and copies of income tax assessments, etc. So I'd now like to move on to the new requirements in section 45 about keeping clients informed. Before we go into the requirements, I know that there has been some confusion in the community about what clients should be kept informed of. This occurred primarily with the earlier iteration of the requirements, which were a bit broader than they are now. So by amending the original determination, government has tried to clarify exactly what the position is. So I want to make it really clear up front that the obligations to keep clients informed do not include any matters about the physical or mental health of a practitioner, and they do not include advising your clients if there is currently a TPB investigation in process. What you are required to keep your clients informed of is limited to prescribed matters that I'll outline shortly. For example, one would be if you have had a sanction imposed by the TPB for a breach of the code. So let's have a look now at the specifics of the obligations. You will be required to advise your clients and prospective clients in a manner and form of the TPB's register, so the existence of the TPB's register of tax and BAS agents, how clients can access the register, how clients can make a complaint about a service that's provided by you, including how the TPB complaints process works. You should keep your clients informed of your rights and responsibilities and obligations as a tax practitioner, including to your client under the tax laws, and what obligations your clients have to you as their registered practitioner. And you should also include information about certain prescribed events, which I'll discuss in a moment. This obligation is intended to ensure that there's transparency in terms of the professional relationship between the tax agent or BAS agent and the client, and it's designed to protect both clients and tax agents and BAS agents in their day-to-day work. The further obligations serve a strong consumer protection focus by enabling taxpayers to make informed decisions about which tax agent or BAS agent they want to engage. So let's move on now and talk about what the prescribed events are. As I've said, it's important that tax practitioners are only required to keep their current and prospective clients informed of prescribed events that happen within the last 5 years. These include if your registration has been suspended or terminated at any time, if you have been or are an undischarged bankrupt or went into external administration, if you were convicted of a serious tax offence, if you were convicted of an offence involving fraud or dishonesty, if you were serving or sentenced to a term of imprisonment in Australia for 6 months or more, if you were penalised subject to an injunction or have been subject to an order for breaching a voluntary undertaking for being a promoter of a tax exploitation scheme. If you were penalised subject to an injunction or have been subject to an order for breaching a voluntary undertaking for implementing a scheme that has been promoted on the basis of conformity with a public ruling, private ruling or oral ruling in a way that is materially different from that described in the ruling. If you are penalised subject to an injunction or have been subject to an order for breaching a voluntary undertaking for promoting on the basis of conformity with a public ruling, private ruling or oral ruling, a scheme that is materially different from that described in the ruling, or if the federal court has ordered you to pay a pecuniary penalty for contravening a civil provision under the Act. Most of these prescribed events are consistent with the events that may affect the continued registration of a registered practitioner, and these must be notified to the TPB for consideration as part of the ongoing registration requirement for all tax and BAS agents to be fit and proper persons. Even where a registered tax practitioner has complied with this requirement by notifying the TPB of an event and then found to continue to be a fit and proper person, the obligation under the determination still requires the practitioner to take the additional steps to separately advise their current and prospective clients. Where relevant, registered practitioners should also consider making plans or arrangements in case they are unable to run their practice in the short or long term to avoid any adverse impact on their clients and their practice. Importantly, disclosure to prospective and current clients should go beyond events relating directly to the individual practitioner, extending to matters relating to any company or partnership they are associated with that are involved in the provision of tax agent services. The determination also requires practitioners to advise all current and prospective clients if they are subject to conditions. A condition typically limits the scope of services that are provided by a registered practitioner. So that might be an R&D condition where a practitioner is only allowed to advise on R&D matters, or perhaps for the quantity surveyors that are registered, they're only allowed to advise in relation to the relevant tax matters surrounding the quantity surveying and depreciation. There may be other matters that you need to advise your clients under other laws. For example, where you've failed to comply with the code and have been ordered by the TPB to take specific actions. This may include an order requiring you to advise clients of one or more matters, such as the findings of an investigation. I'd just like to move on now and talk about what is a reasonable amount of detail. We expect practitioners to provide reasonable details about the relevant matter so that clients can feel that they're fully informed of any matters that may impact their decision to engage or continue to engage you to provide tax or BAS agent services to them. The sort of information that may need to be disclosed includes the date that the relevant matter occurred, a description of the relevant matter, if the relevant matter is an ongoing matter or if it's been finalised, and if you intend to provide another update about the relevant matter if it happens to be an ongoing one. Let's move on and talk about how to go about keeping your clients informed. The code determination requires that you keep all current and prospective clients informed in writing in a prominent, clear and unambiguous state. This requirement is intended to provide flexibility, allowing you to choose your preferred way to advise. So it might be that you do it in your engagement letters. It might be that you do it in relation to a specific matter by an email to your client base. It might be that you record the information on your website and alert your clients to the existence of that information. We also issued a TPB fact sheet that helps you to advise your current and prospective clients about some of the more general matters under the requirements in Section 45, such as information about the TPB's register and complaints process, as well as information regarding rights and responsibilities and obligations, both you and the client. So that's a simple 2-page document that you can simply hand out to your client or enclose with your engagement letters when you're dealing with clients, or even send out with a tax return that you've done for a client. However, it should be clear that the facts sheet will need to be supplemented with any additional relevant information pertaining to other terms of engagement with the client, which will vary depending on the circumstances of the engagement. Generally, we expect you to take all reasonable steps to keep your clients advised of these relevant matters as soon as is practically possible. We'll have a more comprehensive information on timeframes in our draft guidance, so I would recommend you take a look. However, to finish off, I'll share a quick case study with you to demonstrate these obligations. So let's consider Eric's case. Eric is an agent who fails to advise all current and prospective clients of a prescribed event which occurred after 1 July 2022, but before the application date. In this scenario, Eric is a registered agent. He's a sole practitioner with no employees. In early 2023, Eric was subject to an investigation by the TPB into his alleged breach of Code Item 7 for failing to ensure that a tax agent service was provided competently. Following the investigation, the TPB found Eric had breached Code Item 7 and decided to suspend his registration for 6 months. On the 1st of July 2023, Eric received correspondence from the TPB notifying the decision to suspend his registration, and the sanction was published on the TPB register. As the suspension is a prescribed event, it arose after 1 July 2022, but before the relevant application date, i.e. 1 July 2025, Eric is clearly required to inform all clients and prospective clients that he has been suspended, and he's required to do that within 30 days of Section 45 beginning to apply to him. So therefore, he must, no later than 31 July 2025, let all his clients and prospective clients know that he was found to have breached Code Item 7 and has been suspended for 6 months. Now, we understand in this case that Eric chose not to disclose this information and in fact conceal from his clients that he had been suspended. Accordingly, Eric has failed to comply with the determination, and as a result, he has breached the TASA again for failing to keep his clients informed of a prescribed event. Depending on the surrounding circumstances, the TPB may also find that Eric is no longer a fit and proper person to be an agent. So thanks, everybody. I'd now like to bring Julie online, and Julie will manage our Q&A session.
Thanks, Peter. That was really helpful information. I'd also like to invite Tariq and Nadia to join us now so that we can go through some of the questions. So oh, there they are, they're both joined. So Peter, I'll just address the first question to you. This one came up fairly early in the conversation when you were talking about the TPB's approach to enforcing the new obligations. We said that we were taking a pragmatic approach, and people are really curious as to what we mean by that exactly. Would you be able to let us know a bit more detail?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I think, the first thing I'd like to say is that a pragmatic and practical approach is about having, due consideration to the nature of the practice. We really do understand that there's a difference between large and small practices. So our expectations are different in terms of sophistication between those practices. But I also think one of the things that most people, you're not going to notice a lot of change in how the TPB operates. Most of our regulation happens around referrals that we receive from the ATO and complaints that we receive from the public. And that's about individual practitioners who are not necessarily doing the right thing. So when we receive those referrals and complaints, we have what we call a triage process where our team goes through the information that we've been that we've been provided. And we try and make a decision about whether it's a significant matter or perhaps a trivial or lower level matter that can just be dealt with by perhaps a phone call with the practitioner or a letter to the practitioner just advising that we've had these minor complaints. But when there are larger matters, more significant matters of, genuine, perhaps, dishonesty, misuse of excessive work-related expense claims and all those sort of things, it might be a significant referral from the ATO about major bad behaviour, then that's likely to go onto an investigation. Through an investigation, we'll decide if there's been breaches, and then we'll look at what parts of the law of the TASA were breached and what the right penalties are. So we're not going to see a situation where a team of TPB investigators go running around practices, knocking on the door, trying to find out whether you've met these 8 new requirements. But they will be they'll be very much considered and dealt with in those more significant investigations where people really are doing the wrong thing.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Peter. Hopefully that has addressed some of the concerns people had around that. I've got a next question here from Patricia, and Patricia's asking, how often do we need to advise our clients? Do we have to keep advising them, or is it just at the beginning of the engagement that we need to let the clients know of all of these matters?
I think in the first instance, when you at the start of the new law and at the start of any prospective engagement, you need to give the client or prospective client the relevant information. From that point on, you would do it as a matter of course when you renew your engagement letters with ongoing clients, or you would do it if one of those prescribed events happened in your practice. So, if something comes up like you've had a sanction, or if you've become bankrupt, or etc., it's an ongoing process, but only on new engagements, re-engagements, or if a prescribed event happens.
Great, thank you for that. Nadia, I've got a question for you next, and this one is, could you explain what we mean by prospective clients?
Yeah, sure, Julie. So prospective clients would be those clients that haven't yet signed an engagement letter or authority with you, but they've reached out to you about engaging you to provide tax agent services. So they might have given you a call, sent you in an email, filled out a website form, and discussed with you seeking an engagement. It also could be those clients where you've provided tax agent services to them previously, and at the point in time that you're not sure whether they're going to re-engage you, for example, to prepare their income tax return in the following year, that would be a prospective client as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Tariq, when Peter was talking earlier, he was stating that we shouldn't keep copies of IDs for our clients. How can tax practitioners prove that they have met the proof of identity requirements that the ATO has in place, and the TPB as well, if a copy of that document can't be stored?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So our view is that just a good file note will suffice in those circumstances. We don't recommend that tax practitioners keep unnecessarily store clients' personal information, such as those POI documents. So if you make a file note of when you've cited it, what you've cited, that will be sufficient for TPB purposes.
Great, thank you for that. Peter, when you were speaking,
Just add to that one a little bit. It's great for a practice if they've got a checklist of things like that, so that it's clear that it's their normal procedure to do that. They've got a checklist, they've ticked it off, they've got the file note that Tariq talked about, and then you can be satisfied.
So some interesting questions and comments in the chat box today by people who have POI requirements under other sort of regimes. So someone was a financial planner and saying they're required to keep POI documents as a financial planner. So how does that work in with their requirements with the TPB? Just want to make it clear that we recommend you don't keep those documents. If you're required under another regime to hold those POI documents, and there's overlap obviously with the client providing tax agent services and, for example, financial services, that's fine from a TPB perspective. We're just saying if you don't have to hold them, we would not recommend it, because it just makes you obviously a target for fraud and cybercrime and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you for clarifying that one. Yeah, Peter, sorry, when you were speaking earlier, you were sort of referring to tax agent services, and we've got quite a number of BAS agents online today, and I guess they just wanted to clarify what we mean exactly by tax agent services, and are the requirements the same for BAS agents?
Yeah, the requirements are the same for BAS agents, and the law applies to BAS agents. I mean, the work that a BAS agent will do will be a little bit different to the work that a tax agent does. So, clearly we understand that oftentimes the work that a BAS agent does is done through the accounting system of the client. So I think we're not asking you to keep records of the client's accounting system. We're asking you to, have in place those things like engagement letters to make it clear what it is you're going to do for them. We're asking you to have copies of perhaps things like the BAS that you lodge for your client, and to demonstrate that it's been seen and authorised for lodgement by your client. We're asking you to sit there and say, well, if your client said to you, "Oh, I had this unusual transaction, I'm not really sure how to deal with it," the BAS agent might have given some advice to the client and say, "Well, okay, that transaction should be accounted for like this," or "Yes, you do need to pay super on that, payment to a person." So a simple file note that demonstrates that they were asked the question, how they answered it, and what they relied on to come up with the answer. So whether it's a tax ruling or a bit of some information from the ATO website, just be able to take a note and refer to the information that you used to determine the position that was taken.
Great, thanks for that. I've got a question from Roz, and she's just asking about the previous webinar. She missed that session, wasn't able to attend, and just wanted to catch a recording of it. So, Roz, happy to tell you that that's actually up on our YouTube channel now. So if you go on our website, just go to the webinar hub, you can access it from there. We'll put all of the series up as well. So if you can't get to all of them, you can still watch the recording. So yeah, that's available now for you as well. So Tariq, I've got another question from you here from Claudia, and she's just asking about storing records. She wants to know if it's possible to store them electronically.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Absolutely, it's okay. So the records for storage purposes can be electronic or paper. We just want to make sure that if you are storing records electronically, that they're readily accessible if required. That's the only requirement. But yes, you can store them electronically.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, next question here is around some standard wording for tax practitioners. I've had a few people in the chat asking if the TPB can provide standard wording and templates, that kind of thing. Nadia, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I've seen that too. So there's been two sort of variations of the questions that I've seen. First of all, there is a fact sheet, and a few people are asking Julie the best place to find the fact sheet. At the moment, it's in exposure draft form. So if you go on our website and look at the draft information sheet, I understand it's an appendix to that. So go and have a look. That's what we're proposing to release in final form for tax practitioners to use to fulfill part of the obligations for informing their clients. If there's anything we've missed, please let us know during the consultation period so we can make sure that it is as helpful as possible for you all. There's also a few questions about standard wording for engagement letters, I guess because we have referred to engagement letters a lot. The TPB does not provide any templates in respect of engagement letters. We do this because there is such a variation in tax practices and arrangements and engagements with clients. So we don't provide those templates. I know a lot of the professional associations can provide you assistance and templates for engagement letters. You just really need to be careful and make sure it makes sense for your engagement with your client and your practice. It can be a bit dangerous sometimes just using templates and not turning your mind to whether it actually applies to the situation.
Excellent. Thank you for that,
Julie,
Nadia.
I can add on the fact sheet a little bit. The fact sheet that Nadia spoke about, it is attached to that exposure draft, open for comment. The proposal is from the TPB's perspective that if you provide that fact sheet to your clients, you'll satisfy at least two parts of the requirement of keeping your clients informed. One is in relation to information about the register, and the other is the information about the complaints process. So both of those issues are dealt with in the proposed fact sheet. It also talks a little bit about obligations of the practitioner and obligations of their client. So it deals with part of that as well. The idea is the other aspect of that will most likely be dealt with in the engagement letter that you have with your client. So please have a look at that fact sheet and open for comment as well.
Thanks, Tariq. And we'll send a link to that as well after the webinar today, so you've got access to that. Just while we're on the topic of engagement letters as well, I've got a question from Jenna. So Jenna's just asking, does this mean that we need to do re-engagement letters every year, even though you may provide the same services every year?
I think, Julie, it's best practice is to do engagement letters every year for sure. Now, I think the thing for that's probably reasonable and easy enough for the larger practices to do, but might be a little bit burdensome for some of the smaller ones. So I think if you've got a client and you've got an engagement letter with them, I think you should specify at least that it's a 1, 2 or 3 year perhaps thing. You should clearly be ready to redo it if there are changes to the nature of the relationship. So, if within a firm it's going to be a different partner or different practitioner, it's probably wise to upgrade it. If there's any change to the scope of the services that are going to be provided. So, but if you had an arrangement between an accountant and a small business to do their BAS and their tax return and their accounting work, it's not unreasonable for that to be a multi-year thing. But I don't think, genuinely, I think, a 2 or 3 year term is probably enough because things change so rapidly these days. So I think keeping it up to date is good for everybody. And, it's a bit like, in family circumstances, family members can, move and change. And, so I think it's good to think about keeping these things as up to date as possible.
Great, thank you. Next question, Peter, is about informing clients of information. So in particular about certain things around the TPB, so where to find the register, about the complaints process. Would it be adequate for a practitioner just to include that on their website, or should they have it in an engagement letter, or could they do both?
I think it's really fine for a practitioner to refer clients to our website and refer clients to our fact sheets and those sort of things. No problem. But what needs to be done is it needs to be clear that the practitioner has done that. So, a couple of lines in the engagement letter that say, if you want any details on how to, you can go to tpb.gov.au, what the website address is, that there is a fact sheet. You don't need to reproduce all of it, but enough information for the client to know that we exist, how to manage with our complaints processes, and how to get information about what their obligations, their respective obligations between tax practitioner and client are.
Great, thank you for that. Nadia, I've got a question here around timing for prescribed events. So if a prescribed event occurs before 31 July 2025, do tax practitioners need to inform their clients about that event?
Yes. So if the event occurs after 1 July 2022, sorry to throw another date at everyone, you will need to inform your clients. So for instance, if you are a small practitioner, I imagine a lot of you online today, the requirements will come into play for you from 1 July 2025. So if something has occurred, a prescribed event has occurred after 1 July 2022, you will need to tell your clients about that within 30 days after the obligations apply to you. So that would be by 31 July 2025. I hope that makes sense. I'm sorry about throwing so many dates around.
Thanks, Nadia, that's helpful. I've got a few questions here around proof of identity, so I might just shoot those off to you all together. So Richard's asking what procedures would need to be followed regarding POI and engagement?
Okay, well, that's a loaded question, Richard. There's all sorts of procedures. We have our minimum POI requirements that are in our practice note. I would strongly suggest you go and have a look at the requirements in that, and it sets out all the bare minimums that you'll need to know. But you should be undertaking POI in respect of every client before you're providing tax agent services. I did see a couple of comments in the Q&A about what happens if you've got clients, you've had clients, the same client for over 10 years. Even if, and I forget whose question it was. Oh, it was an anonymous person. Even if you've moved practices, like the question asked, so this person is saying, if I've moved tax practice, but a client has followed me, and you know that client can be considered a well-established client. So again, in our guidance, we talk about what it means to be a well-established client. And ultimately, if you have a well-established client, you do not necessarily need to undertake the full POI checks for them, but you are required to complete a detailed file note about why you consider them to be well established. So that file note would contain detail like, I've known the client for X number of years, I've provided all their returns, all that sort of detail. And then that's obviously satisfying yourself and the TPB, should it ever come up, that you've made a considered, informed decision about not undertaking those additional POI steps. So yeah, I hope that clears that up.
I think you have cleared that up. Thanks, Nadia. So I'll move on to a couple of questions now about engagement letters. I've got Philip asking, is it possible to have your engagement letters signed and witnessed electronically, or do you have to do that physically with your client?
It's fine to do that electronically. There's a lot of good, DocuSign type of projects today, or simply, email it out, get it signed and scanned back to you. That's perfectly acceptable to us.
Great, thank you. And should it be on an official letterhead, or can you just do it on plain paper?
Look, I think it's genuinely preferable to have it on letterhead. In today's, I hope that not too many of our practitioners are still using typewriters. I think most of us can produce a letterhead on our computers. So just, enough information to make it clear that it's an engagement letter between the client and the practitioner is the most important thing. Letterhead is certainly useful, and you can always put on your TPB symbol and registration details.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. There's a lot of questions in here just around POI, which I think we've already addressed most of those. So what I might do is wrap things up and hand over to each of you for just a minute or two to give any final thoughts, takeaways on today's topic. So Peter, I might go to you first.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks everybody for your time. I think, we're very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of new information and dates flying around, but hopefully through the webinars and through the process of having a look at our guidance, you'll be able to get your head around it pretty quickly. And I think for most of you, it's going to be pretty light touch anyway.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Nadia, over to you.
Look, I guess I just want to make it really clear that we've prepared the guidance with, the various types and sizes of practitioners in mind. So we really do understand that the majority of practitioners are very time poor, but at the same time, they're very committed to being professional and ethical and doing the right things. We've reflected that in our guidance, but if there's anything else we can provide, case studies or anything of that nature to assist you in doing the right thing, please do let us know throughout the consultation period. We really do want to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Nadia. And Treek, did you have anything you'd like to close on?
I just want to echo that sentiment from Nadia. The obligations that Peter has spoken about today, the two of the new 8 obligations in the code determination. We've released guidance products on a separate guidance product on each of those obligations. It's under the exposure draft section on our website. We invite and welcome all comment and feedback. This is really an opportunity for practitioners and stakeholders to shape that guidance when it's finalised later this year. So really have a look at it, download it, read it, and have your input, have your say.
Thanks, Treek. I think that's a really important opportunity for everyone to get involved, as you say, and have their say in the final position. So just let everyone else know as well, Peter mentioned that we have a series of webinars on the code determination. So we did do the first one last week. This is our second. We have another 2 to go. So if you wanted to register for those, just jump onto our website, and that's tpb.gov.au/webinars. So once they're all final, we will have the recordings available as well on our YouTube channel, and we will send them out to everyone following the conclusion of all 4 so that you have access to them as well. But just to finish up, some information on how to stay in touch with us. So as I said, and as everyone sort of said today, the website is a fabulous resource of information, and that again is tpb.gov.au. You can also follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook and X. You'll get the most up-to-date information there, and we'll always let you know when we're doing further webinars and things like that on our social media, so keep an eye on that. We also have our TPB e-news, which goes out every month. Highly recommend that you subscribe to that as well if you're not already doing so, and you can do that at tpb.gov.au/newsroom. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that's a really great way for you to hear when we do put new recordings up, so you'll receive a notification. And also we do have a really comprehensive library of webinars there as well, so if you go on there and view any of our recordings, you can still claim CPE or continuing professional education for viewing those as well. So I wanted to say a big thank you to Peter and to Tariq and to Nadia for all your great insights today. I think it's been invaluable to everyone on board. And also thank you to Fiona and to Maddie for assisting with the questions as well today. Thank you so much for that. And just finally, today's webinar does count towards your CPE, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. We will be issuing attendance certificates for those people that have stayed online today. And then finally, just to finish up today, we will be launching an exit survey, and we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to complete it. It's very, very quick, only takes 1 moment of your time, and it's really valuable because it actually lets us know of things that we can improve on, but also any topics that you might be interested in hearing about. If you let us know of those, we'll consider them as well. So the survey just pops up in your browser once you leave the webinar today. So once again, thank you so much for your time today, and we do hope to speak to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.